I could not have been happier when I was promoted to manager of the customer service department. The company I worked for is in the heating industry, so we primarily focus on pellet stoves, wood stoves, as well as pellet and wood to burn. I worked there for 8 years before I was finally given the position of manager, and that was only because our previous manager stepped down. But once I was put in charge, I finally had a sense of stability. Not to mention, I loved all of my staff. We only had 6 workers in the office, including myself, but for the most part, everyone did their job. The only problem I ever had with the position was when I was forced to fire somebody. It wasn't something that I particularly wanted to do, but I had one associate that was always coming in to work late. And then while he was there, he wasn't performing well, and eventually the higher-ups saw that and told me that I had to give him a formal warning. And once he ignored that, I was told that I had to fire him. I called him into my office and tried my best to explain the situation to him, but I'll never forget how angry he got at that moment. As soon as he realized he was being terminated, he began raising his voice at me and trying to say that I wasn't being fair. So again, I explained to him that it was the only thing that we could do, and then he and the company would have to move forward in separate directions. And to my surprise, he seemed to understand. He was clearly still upset, but after I handed him his termination slip, he opened the door to my office and walked out. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that I had to fire someone. I didn't like that feeling, but I also figured that I wouldn't have to deal with that again, at least not for a while. But that turned out to be completely wrong. The next day, everyone showed up to work on time, and the shift went perfectly. And since it was Friday, I decided to let everyone go about an hour before the shift ended and told them that I would close up on my own. Little did I know, the employee that I had fired the previous day was sitting in the parking lot, waiting. Once everybody had left the office, I went back and sat behind my desk, but within a couple of minutes, I heard the door to the office open up. I figured that someone had forgotten something, but was shocked to see my former employees storming into my office with a gun in hand pointing in my direction. I fell back in my seat as he stepped into the room. His face was red and I could smell beer on his breath. Before I could say anything to him, he turned to make sure that no one else had been in the room, and I thought I might be able to get around him while he wasn't looking. In hindsight, that wasn't the best plan, considering I would have had to go right by him to escape. But I was fearing for my life and not thinking clearly, so I rushed for the door as he looked around. There was no point though. Before I made it out from behind my desk, he was looking back at me and pushed his gun even closer to my face as he ordered me to move. The next couple of minutes dragged on for what felt like hours, as the gunman explained to me how I had ruined his life. I tried to tell him that I was sorry and that there was nothing I could do, but all he kept telling me was, "You're not sorry, you don't know sorry." There were multiple times during the incident when I thought that he was getting ready to pull the trigger. Thankfully, it never came to that. It turned out one of the security guards that worked for the building saw the man enter and proceeded to follow him up to our office. And once he saw that he was armed, he decided it was better not to interject and simply call the police. Lucky for me, the man was so focused on me that he didn't notice the 2 officers enter the office. By the time he realized that they were there, he was out of options. Just to be safe, I dropped to the floor, putting my desk between me and the gunman. But thankfully, no shots were fired, and the former employee was arrested and charged by the company for various charges. One of the easiest jobs I ever had was back when I worked at a customer service center for the U.S. Postal Service in California. I worked there for 5 years before all of us were forced to look for employment elsewhere. Thankfully, I ended up getting hired at a different customer service center that offered me a better position. But I'll never forget our last day. It was the middle of May 2009, and we all had just gotten back from lunch. Our call center was on the 4th floor of a 7-floor office building. And that day would not only be our last day in that building, but it was also the first time that I ever had to interact with workers from other companies that happened to work out of the same building. As I said, We had just gotten back from lunch, and since it was Friday, all of us decided to walk around the corner and grab some food from the Spanish restaurant right next door. It was delicious and cheap, and the food came out quickly, so it was perfect. Plus, the restaurant smelled amazing inside. It always made going back to the office kind of bland. However, that day, as soon as we walked inside, all of us made note of a weird smell. It was almost like someone had lit a vanilla candle or something. But after looking around for a while, none of us could find anything that was on fire. That was not until we began hearing a ton of commotion coming from the stairwell outside of our office. Another worker and I ran over to the stairwell and opened the door to see what was happening. And as soon as we did, we were hit with a wave of thick gray smoke that came barreling into the office. We stepped back, and through our coughing fit, I could see that people were rushing from the upper floors down the stairs and out of the building. And that was before either my coworker or myself could turn to tell everyone to get out of the building. The alarms finally kicked on. We all quickly made our way into the smoke-filled stairway and into the small crowd of people that were pushing their way down the stairs. As we made it closer to the bottom, I noticed that everyone was beginning to slow down, and by the time we had gotten from our floor down to the second floor, we were at a standstill. For some reason, the door at the bottom of the stairwell was locked, and that wasn't good because the stairs were filling with smoke very quickly. I tried not to panic and began looking around, which was when I thought to check what the second floor had to offer us. I grabbed my co-workers and let everyone know that we were going to look for another way out, and I'm glad we did that. Once we made it into the office on the second floor, which happened to be the therapist's office, we were lucky enough to find a window that was slightly cracked open. I ran over to the window and opened it before pushing the screen out. It was only a 14-foot drop into the grass below, and thankfully one of my coworkers helped me lower down as I climbed out of the window. Once I was outside, I ran over to the security guard who was standing in the parking lot and informed him that the door to the stairwell was locked. The two of us rushed inside and unlocked the door. Everyone evacuated the building as quickly as we could, and the fire department showed up shortly after. It turned out that the fire had started on the 5th floor, and it ended up seriously damaging the 2 floors above it and the floor below it. The building was forced to close down because the reconstruction would have been too costly. A couple of years ago, while working as a janitor for this office building in Boston, I learned that even the safest seeming jobs can put you in harm's way. You see, the first couple of months that I worked at the office, I was the night shift custodian, which meant that on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, myself and one other custodian would clean up around the building. It wasn't the best job in the world, but it paid the bills, and it really wasn't too difficult. Little did I know, there are some pretty great lengths that some people will go through to get whatever they want. It was a Wednesday night, and I had just finished cleaning up the second floor of the building, and my coworker was working on the top floor. That was our method. He would work from the top down, and I would clean the bottom floor and upward. But after I finished with the second floor, I radioed my coworker and let him know that I was taking a 5-minute smoke break before making my way down to the first floor and toward the parking lot. And as I made my way out of the front door, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head, and I was thrown forward. I turned around to see 3 men standing over me, one of which was holding a gun in his hand that he used to hit me on the back of my head. The men picked me up off the ground and began forcing me back into the building. I asked them what they wanted, but they wouldn't tell me at first. They just kept pushing me forward toward the elevator. With each step that I took, all I could do was hope that my coworker didn't call me on the radio. We got to the elevator, and after forcing me inside, the man that was holding the gun told me to push the button for the 3rd floor. Right away, I knew what they were doing. That floor was rented out by a pharmaceutical sales company, and they were hoping to find drugs in there. Little did they know that for the most part, the company only handles samples. I didn't argue with them. I just did my best to stay calm and hope that they didn't resort to hurting me. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt like it lasted for days, and by the time the doors opened, I was visibly shaking from the nerves. One of the men told me to move, but my legs were frozen from fear, which irritated them. and caused them to hit me over the head with the gun again. I fell out of the elevator and collapsed on the floor of the office as the 3 men stepped out and began making their way through the office. I guess they thought they had knocked me unconscious, so they weren't watching me. That gave me the perfect chance to make a break for it. I knew the elevator wouldn't open in time, so I began running down the stairs that were right next to it. As soon as I was out of earshot, I pulled my radio out of my pocket and warned my coworker to stay where they were and hide. I also asked him to call the police, and I made my way out of the building as fast as I could. Once I was outside, I ran around the corner and hid behind the dumpster, and I'm glad I did, because right behind me was one of the men who had apparently been chasing after me. I could see him looking around as I did my best to keep myself hidden from him, but it wasn't long before he closed in on the dumpster and began walking toward it. There was nowhere for me to go or to hide. My heart began to race as I waited for him to inevitably find me. It was lucky for me that my coworker called the police and there was a unit in the area, because before he could find me, I could see the red and blue flashing lights coming down the road. The man outside tried to make a run for it, but the cops had both entrances to the parking lot covered, and it wasn't long before there were 6 cars outside. The officers stormed the building and apprehended the men, who were caught with 2 boxes of painkiller samples in their backpacks. The 3 men were arrested and charged with armed robbery, and I was just lucky that they happened to leave me alone for a split second.